Hello and welcome to another episode of the Tyndale House podcast. This is another one of our interviews where we talk to people who have lived at Tyndale House, or certainly who have spent time studying or working here. And today I'm joined by Ahreum Kim, who has been in and out of Tyndale House for as long as I've been around, which is about 18 months. And I think you probably go back a little bit further than that. So let's start by finding out who you are, where you're from, and what your background is, those kinds of things.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here. Yeah, I've been at Tyndale, on and off since like 2019, I believe, when I was doing my MPhil thesis. And I'm originally born in South Korea and lived in America most of my life, mostly in the Northeast in Connecticut. And I did my undergraduate degree at Yale in anthropology because I just found people really fascinating and interesting. But I think even during that time, I sort of knew that I was called to this road of biblical scholarship.
Okay, so you didn't go into biblical scholarship because you no longer found people interesting.
Well, I think because I'm a pastor's kid. My dad's a Methodist minister. And so I think I knew from about age 16 that I was called down this road, but I sort of resisted it because I was sort of afraid and sort of felt the weight of responsibility. But I always loved the Bible. You know, even when I was a teenager, I loved looking up words, like even in English, I was like, wisdom. I want to learn about wisdom. I looked up every single word I could find, on wisdom and was so interested in it. But I did my, eventually sort of when I gave in to this call, so to speak, I did an MDiv degree at Torch Trinity Graduate University in Korea, in English.
Right.
I liked that institution because it was a very missional institution. They had a lot of professors who were actually educated in the UK, and they actually pushed me pretty hard to do a PhD. And specifically at Cambridge. Okay. And I ended up being very blessed to be able to actually get in. And I did my MPhil and PhD here. And right. So, and I love it. I have to say, I love being a biblical scholar.
Great.
So, yeah.
What was your PhD, your MPhil and PhD? What were you looking at for that?
Yeah, so my favorite book of the Bible has always been 1 John because it's emphasis on love.
Right.
Chapter 4 talks about love in different forms more than 30 times, which is way more than anywhere else in any other chapter in the Bible. And I thought, for me, the gospel is a love-centered, love-centered religion, love-centered gospel. And so I was like, if I'm going to spend several years studying something, I want to study love. And so I did my MPhil on love and fear and understanding God in 1 John. And then I wanted to continue. I just liked the book. And then I looked at the victory language in 1 John when it talks about conquering the world, conquering the Antichrists, and sort of looked at it in the Greco-Roman world, in the Greco-Roman context.
Interesting. Who was your supervisor?
George Van Kooten. He's the current Lady Margaret's professor.
Right. Mm-hmm. And what were some of the things that came out of that research that particularly struck you? What have you done with that research since?
Yeah, I mean, the crux that I was really interested in was looking, I think every letter, just like any letter now, you can't properly understand it without understanding the cultural context. And so I was just being an sociocultural anthropology person in my undergrad, I really wanted to understand the culture of the first century, the diverse world of the Greco-Roman world, and, reading my favorite letter within that Greco-Roman world. Is there anything that we've been missing? Is there anything we've been misunderstanding about the letter and what, the Johannine writer is trying to say? And I felt like we were. And so
tell us more about that then.
Yeah. So, one of the things that I was really curious about, even as a teen, when it says the perfect love casts out fear bit. And because I loved verses, from Proverbs, like the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And I was like, well, if perfect love casts out fear, it doesn't seem like these are concordant with one another. It seems like fear and love are being opposed with one another. And then when I actually, sort of grew up and learned Greek and was looking at it, I was like, oh yeah, you see all these love, 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 love. And then suddenly in this just one verse, you see fear, 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 fear 4 times in just one verse. I was like, what's that about? And how come they, fear and love are put in antithesis to one another? And if you understand the culture, it becomes readily obvious. Because in the Greco-Roman polytheistic world, fear of the gods, fear of divine judgment was a very strong thing. And even a very severe, extreme, superstitious version of fear was quite common in the culture. And you see like Stoics and Epicureans sort of reacting to that.
I was just thinking about Acts 17 when Paul turns up there, and the city is full of idols. As I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, the place is full of idols because of their fear of some unknown god. With the unknown god, the altar to the unknown god. What if there's another one that they've not accounted for? They're in big trouble. So that the fear is so much. At the heart of that. So
that's absolutely right. And if you sort of take 1 John to be from in the context of Ephesus or any other sort of Greco-Roman city, it absolutely makes sense that he would say, perfect love casts out fear. So when you're embracing the love of God, God is love, which is mentioned twice in that same section. You realize, wow, this is a really radical thing he's saying. When you embrace the love of God, when these Christians, when you believe in Jesus as the true Son of God, and even that, his emphasis, I was like, why does the writer keep saying, Jesus as the true Son of God, the true Son of God, true Son of God? Well, if you know from the culture that the Son of God, that is a reference to the emperor. If you talked about in the first century, who's the Son of God? Most people would say, oh, the emperor, the Divi Filius, Son of God. It's stamped on our coins. It says Divi Filius, Son of God. That's the emperor, So it absolutely makes sense. When you understand that culture and you come to the background and you know that background of the culture and you read 1 John again, you're like, oh, yeah, this is kind of what he's referring to. He's trying to, it's meant to be encouraging. The rest of the world believes in something radically different, believes in the emperor as the Son of God, believes that fear of the gods, we're just scared of the gods all the time. But we, as this very minority, maybe just a few dozen Christians in this Johannine community, we're not crazy. We actually believe in the true Son of God, and we don't have to be fearful because God is love, and when we embrace this love, that fear from the culture that everyone else believes in, that just automatically is cast out, goes away, naturally, and it also really explains the end of the letter when he says the very last sentence of 1 John when it says, keep yourselves from idols. That makes complete sense.
If you That's always struck me as a very odd way to finish the letter. That's an interesting afterthought, but everything that you're saying, actually, yes, it makes so much sense. This is, what you're suggesting is that this is right at the heart of John's letter, then. And it's not to focus on the idols, but rather, sort of embracing the true Son of God, embracing the community. Don't be taken in by sort of the Antichrist spirit or the false prophets who are trying to convince you of something else. Keep yourselves from all the things that might influence you to believe what the world believes, because actually what 98% of the world believes in is not, is not the true, not the truth. And so, So if John is addressing, particularly when he's talking about love casts out fear, if he's addressing that fear of the gods, the pagan gods, and God's love and love for God casts that out, how does that speak into the contemporary world where we don't live in fear of the gods?
Yeah, well,
I can't even imagine what it feels like to live in that kind of a world.
Yeah, I mean, in our contemporary world, our gods look a bit different, I would say. We have different forms of idols. I think in social media we have the self being a big idol. We want me. We want our selfies out there. We want all the attention. How many likes do we get? We've become the idol. A lot of times the thing that we're most afraid of is, public opinion or not being significant or, needing the praises of others, so a lot of people fear death, and so that our own sort of morality comes into play, and so
Right.
the fears are all still there. It's just coming in different forms.
Sure.
And I think it is so beautiful and relevant that it's like when you embrace the true love of God, when you know that you're a child of God, that's like your number one identity. You're not that bothered about what other people think.
Right.
You're just like, I love God. God loves me so much. That's enough. So yeah.
Interestingly, I was hearing somebody also from Korea yesterday talking about her experience of coming to know Jesus a few years ago in Oxford, and she was saying almost exactly that. That she was so fearful of life because everything, her identity was grounded in herself, and therefore it was very fragile. And coming to recognise that her identity was in Christ, and then losing that fear. It's almost exactly what you're saying. So yeah, that's very interesting. I don't have a lot of time for Freud, but he's not far off the mark when he says everything we do is with the intention of reducing our anxiety. That's if you're not living within a relationship with Jesus where your identity is founded on him, then anxiety is a massive driver. So I don't think he's far off at that point.
Yeah, and I think you really see that with the sort of young people now, like the Generation Z or whatnot. You really see them really struggling with that and just identity, and you see that come out in all sorts of forms. People don't know who they are. People want attention, whatever will garner attention, and so.
Yeah. So you took your PhD work and you were able to do something with it, putting it into print.
Yeah,
so
I was able to publish it. So it's
excellent. Congratulations on having that in print. That's
thank you
a very
so much.
satisfying thing.
Yeah.
So tell us about the book then.
Yeah. So thankfully, the person who ended up my supervisor, George Van Kuchen, he really pushed me hard. I wasn't fully confident myself about putting it out there for the world to read. But he insisted, and he suggested the Library of New Testament Studies series specifically at TNT Clark Bloomsbury. And so sort of out of obedience to him, I just submitted. And the reviewer, it's blind, so I don't know who the reviewer was, but I did get to read the report, and to whoever it was extremely kind and was, just very effusive about how important this research was, and it was very encouraging. And so it really gave me sort of that boost of confidence to say, okay, well, maybe what I did was all right, and maybe people do need to read it and, get to, again, it's tempting to think that as scholars, it's my name on the cover, and, it's going to reflect poorly on me. And, even as a Bible scholar, we can, be fearful of like, oh, what are people going to think of me?
Sure.
But I sort of had to remind myself it's not about me. And, if I did my job all right, then hopefully people will understand God better, understand and be encouraged by what the Bible's trying to say, what these letters are trying to say, not only to first century Christians, but to us, and to sort of see how God has been there and encouraged people like the whole way through. And so, yeah, so
Great.
Yeah.
Who do you anticipate is the readership of this?
Well, I did send it to a few of, sort of pastor and elder friends and stuff like that, and sort of people who are just interested in theology, and they were like, "Oh, it's way over my head," It is sort of Greek heavy, but and sort of exegetical in bits. But I think so. It is a bit more scholarly, but I think people are able to grasp it at some level,
right.
Even if they don't know Greek. Hopefully they'll be able to see sort of the crux of the message. And
yeah.
there's also images in here, so at the very least they can look at the pictures, if nothing else, Yeah, images of the Greco-Roman gods and what they were like, and stamps of, or the imprints of the coins, Roman coins that have Divi Filius, the Son of God, stamped on them and stuff like that. So,
and it will influence scholars who are working on their own research, on commentators, and it will trickle down into the church, even if your pastor friends feel a bit intimidated by it.
Yeah, at the very least, I had an opportunity to share at my dad's church
Great.
Before he retired, and people said they were really grateful. They sort of forgot, it's easy to read the Bible sometimes as a very abstract sort of text. And they forgot, people came up to me afterwards and they said, wow, you sort of made it real. Like you sort of forgot that this was a letter written down and to real people in the first century, and that they lived in a Greco-Roman world. You sort of, it's just so foreign sometimes to just a typical lay person in the church. And they said they found that really helpful and sort of encouraging, even from like a historical perspective. And so,
Great. And you did quite a bit of that work while you were here at Tyndale. How was the experience of being in Tyndale House for you?
Yeah, I mean, Tyndale, it's hard to beat Tyndale in terms of the resources, like you pretty much have all the resources just available right there, certainly all the biblical ones. And then because I did a big chunk of it in classics, the classics library is just down the street, like a less than 10-minute walk. And so, I did spend quite a lot of time in the classics department and sometimes in the university library. And just being here in Cambridge and just having a desk at Tyndale and just having all the books there. And if I need a book, I can just walk, just a few steps down and get it. That's been, massively helpful. And it allows me to do, I was, thankfully able to finish very quickly. And a lot of that was because the resources were all just conveniently located. So really grateful for the resources at Tyndale.
And was the community of Tyndale House, was that important to you? Was that a part of it, or was that just an enjoyable side aspect of living here?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely appreciate the coffee and biscuits. As a student, we all, especially as a student, you just sort of drink at that coffee and just munch on those biscuits. But admittedly, I can be quite the introvert, but. What's really nice is there were definitely times where I was like, you know what, I have a question. Right. And I know, there's so many different people I can go to. I can be like, well, let me ask Pete Williams a question, let me ask Dirk a question, and then there's a lot of Old Testament people too. So if I have a Hebrew question, there's so many people to ask. And, so that, even that aspect also very convenient. And these are some of the top scholars in the world. So,
Great. And what have you done since your PhD? You have another book there.
I do have another book. Yeah, I only graduated a couple of years ago, but somehow I was again blessed and lucky enough to work with Morna Hooker. Yeah, this is a collection of essays by Professor Morna Hooker, who just turned 93. I don't know if she wants me to tell that really publicly, but
we won't tell anybody. Just between us.
But it's called Old and New, Essays in Continuity and Discontinuity in the New Testament. And I did not anticipate at all that my name would be on the cover as edited by Ahreum Kim, next to her name. It's the huge, it's the biggest privilege of my life. I already think I've already peaked in my career. Wow. This is the top. I can't do any better than this, I don't think. But I was, it's 45 of her essays, 2 of which have never been published before. And it covers scholarship, 50 years of scholarship from the 1970s until now. And it's...
That's a big job to bring all of that together,
yeah,
isn't it?
It was 2 years of work.
Wow.
And there were, I contacted, you also have to get copyright permission from everybody. Right. And so, multiple publishers, some of which don't exist anymore or were bought out by another company. And so that endeavor alone was quite a huge thing. But the Lady Margaret's fund was kind enough to have me on as an assistant to help her put out this book. And and it's been a massive privilege to work on this 700 plus page volume.
Very good. And what are you working on now?
Now I'm sort of working on multiple things. I've worked on a couple other book projects with the Wolf Institute and with Sheffield Press, but I'm right now trying to finish my what I hope will be my second monograph called Jesus' Inner Circle, the Fear, Faith, and Boldness of Peter, James, and John, and sort of asking the question, why are these three disciples so special? Like, how come they're the only ones that were invited to the resurrection of Jairus' 12-year-old daughter and the transfiguration and Gethsemane? Why are these three so important? So
you gave a talk about this in our lunchtime talk series, Tyndale Talks, just the other day. This is a dangerous question to ask, but can you summarize your answer to why these three are important in 2 minutes?
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line that I discovered, and you can, if you're not convinced, or since I only have a minute or so, but fundamentally I said it is a sort of personality thing. I think the biggest sort of crux being Andrew. Andrew is among the first four disciples, but he's not included in this three. And the minimal narratives that we have of Andrew, mostly in John's gospel, present him very differently, sort of more inquisitive, observant sort of guy, whereas Peter, James, and John are presented as very bold, impetuous, sort of zealous guys. The way Peter jumps out of boats and, the way James and John are willing to throw fire down on a Samaritan village, stuff like that shows their character. And I think that sort of character was needed in the early church. And Jesus sort of gave them these special moments, like transfiguration moments, to encourage them. Oh yeah, when Jesus is no longer with them, to remember, oh yeah, remember when we went on the mountain and we saw Elijah and Moses with Jesus? I think, that guy really was the Messiah. We should really go for this, even though we're facing persecution. And of course, James dies in Acts 12. Right. But we see that James and John sort of live up to what they're Peter and John live up to what they're supposed to do. We see in Acts 3 and 4 and Acts 8 that they're known as guys who are full of boldness, parousia, boldness. And the believers pray for boldness. And so that boldness becomes really important, especially to the early church.
Right.
So.
Right, that's very interesting. How do you see them transformed? Because the boldness can be the impetuosity could be a problematic thing, and it doesn't fit very comfortably with the idea of humility, and yet these were key people in the early church. So presumably you see them undergoing some kind of transformation of those qualities, that they be something that could be a negative actually is also something that becomes a positive.
Yeah, and so I think you see that reflected in Gethsemane. Just like all of us, we have sort of characteristics that are put in us, whether we're more, administratively inclined, introverted, extroverted, bold or shy, but I think that's maybe, part of God's plan. And for the early church to be established, you needed to be a strong person to face the level of persecution that they faced and the level of doubts that would have come into mind, especially when Jesus is no longer there. He's been crucified. He's not here anymore. So Peter, James, and John were bold guys. They had that character already, but they needed that sort of sanctification period. And you see in Gethsemane, Jesus says, keep awake and pray regarding a time of testing. So we see that they're going to go through a testing, maybe similar to the sort of temptation testing that Jesus himself had to go through before he started his ministry. Because through that testing, if you did your testing well, you recognize as you go through it, not only are you stronger on the other side, I passed my maths test, I think I know maths, and they sort of needed that time period to really be prepared for that testing, to go through it, to be sanctified. And, they faced the persecution and they sort of came out the other side. So,
okay, right. Great. And when do you think that might be published? Or when are you hoping for?
I'm hoping to finish in the next few months, but we'll see. There's a lot on at the moment,
Okay, yeah. It's another big job for you to do.
Yeah.
Lauren, thank you. That's been a great conversation with you. Very interesting stuff. I'm looking forward to digging into the countercultural victory of 1 John in the Greco-Roman context myself when I get the chance to. It won't be for a little while, but there's stuff I want to find out in there. So thanks so much.
Thank you.